Okay, so picture this, Marilyn. A New York Times reporter, right? She's been like 2 years deep into this massive OpenAI lawsuit. All the sources, the depositions, document review, the whole 9 yards. She genuinely believes she's at the forefront of a constitutional fight, over what AI is actually allowed to read and remember. Her editor, totally calls it the trial of the decade. Every front page has just been hers.
And here's the kicker, Marcus. On a prediction market, like real money, millions of dollars in liquid contracts, is actively positioned against her whole premise. It's wild.
Not against her work, though. That's the thing. It's against the idea that the case actually, gets answered, like a real verdict.
Exactly. The headlines, they're screaming there's an 85% chance this becomes a war that defines AI. But Kalshi, this federally licensed event contract exchange, it's pricing a settlement at 68%. That's a 17-point gap on a binary outcome. And it's been sustained, like across multiple sessions. It's not just a blip, it's a whole signal.
17 points, that's huge though. On a single binary, a sustained gap, in a sector where these contracts are super liquid, that's capital telling you the press has just misread the road entirely. Like they're on a different path.
Or capital is reading a different road entirely. That's the part I'm gonna pull on today. I think there's more to it.
All right, so today we're really walking everyone to a specific number on Kalshi. The Phoenix governance report we're working from, it flags 0.58 as the breach threshold. That's the level where the settlement architecture has definitively won, before any jury even sees the case. By the end of this, you'll know what to watch. And you'll know why crossing that threshold might mean winning the trade, but like losing something the trade can't even measure.
Because the gap, Marcus, it isn't between two predictions of the same event. It's really between two completely different theories of what the legal system is even for, right? That's the core.
That's the cut. Let's open it. So let's anchor what we're looking at. Where does this 0.68 come from in the first place?
Okay, so Kalshi has this contract that resolves on whether the Times case settles before a verdict on the merits. As of today, May 3rd, that contract is sitting right at 0.68. The Phoenix governance report confirms it, and that 17-point gap with the public narrative, which is around 0.85, it's held steady. This isn't, a flicker. It's a sustained position. And the ground beneath it? Well, there are three pieces. First, Judge Stein in January forced OpenAI to produce 20 million ChatGPT logs. That's massive discovery, usually signaling trial. Second, the Anthropic settlement reset the cost of AI training data litigation. It set a new floor. And third, all these major publishers like Meredith, News Corp, Vogue, they've all signed licensing deals. They're not waiting for court. So yeah, the market sees all that and prices a settlement.
So discovery accelerates, the settlement floor rises, publishers are organizing around licensing, and the market just sees all that and prices a settlement? That's the read?
That's the read. But here's the assumption I really want to surface, Everyone, the media, the podcasts, they assume a settlement is a resolution. Like the case ends, dispute over, move on, right?
Yeah, that's the standard interpretation, isn't it?
It's also the load-bearing assumption. Look at what a settlement actually does here. The Times alleges OpenAI used copyrighted articles to train a system that now competes with them. The core legal question is, what does fair use mean when it's like industrial-scale training? That question? Never adjudicated, no precedent. A settlement, it doesn't adjudicate it. It just makes it disappear, Marcus. Disappear into a private license, which has zero precedential force. The next AI lab, the next publisher, they face the same question with no answer. All they've inherited from the Times case is, well, a price.
Wow, that's not a resolution. That's an eraser.
Exactly. I want to run this analogy that I think clarifies the mechanism. Carbon credits. Carbon markets don't reduce carbon, they price it. The question of whether something should even be emitted, it gets transformed into a cost. Once you have a market, the boundary becomes a variable. Political will collapses because the system's designed to absorb emissions, not prevent them. That question of industrial emissions exits the public domain entirely. It just becomes a quote on a screen.
And settlement architecture does the same thing to fair use. It prices the question out of court.
It prices a question that was supposed to function as a boundary. Once it's priced, the doctrine becomes vestigial. It's still there, lawyers cite it, but it doesn't really constrain anyone because the optimization function has moved elsewhere. So the market isn't pricing whether the times wins, it's pricing whether the doctrine still functions as a boundary at all. And the market's answer is, not really. 68 cents on the dollar.
68 cents on the dollar. So I want to take that a level deeper, because if the doctrine has stopped functioning as a boundary, that has consequences in places no one's really tracking.
Oh, absolutely. Settlement architecture, it's not free. It costs hundreds of millions, eventually billions, to deploy at scale. A startup AI lab, they can't pay it. A new entrant? Nope. Only labs that already exist, the ones with capital partners, can pay. So the settlement isn't a tax on growth, it's a barrier to entry. The companies that pay to make their copyright problems disappear, they're inheriting a market structure where copyright problems are structurally impossible for anyone else. The Anthropic number, OpenAI's emerging number, those become the price of admission to the whole industry.
That's the moat. That's the moat right there.
That's the moat. And the lateral connection I want to test runs into the mental health baseline the report flags. The CDC's Youth Risk Behavior Survey shows 30% of high school students reporting persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness, 43% for teen girls. Common Sense Media says AI companion adoption among teens is 72%. Average social media use, 4.8 hours a day. It's all connected.
Okay, but I need this to be mechanism, not theme. Connect them. Test me through it.
Okay, so the settlement architecture, it concentrates AI capability in a small set of labs, right? Those labs are funded by, and they feed back into, the engagement revenue economy of the major platforms. Google, Meta, Microsoft. These platforms, they've got no business pressure to redesign their recommender systems because there's no legal pressure either.
Right. The net choice line keeps state regulation enjoined under the First Amendment, like Louisiana's Act 456 was struck down in February. Federal preemption is stalled, so the algorithms don't change. The 4.8 hours don't change. The 43% of teen girls feeling sad or hopeless, that doesn't change. None of those steps is just, thematic. Each one is documented. That's the chain.
That's the chain, and the chain holds.
So where does it project? Like 5 to 10 years out, what happens if this settlement architecture remains the dominant resolution mode?
3 patterns extend. 1, the AI training market consolidates to roughly 3 labs: OpenAI, Anthropic, probably Meta. Everyone else, they're licensing through them. 2, fair use doctrine becomes legacy code. It gets cited, but it never gets adjudicated, because no plaintiff with leverage is going to refuse a settlement that's more valuable than a verdict. And 3, the same routing mechanism propagates. The next constitutional question, algorithmic recommender liability, AI-generated defamation, AI-mediated medical advice, it gets resolved the same way, not through doctrine, through capital pricing. Each domain converts from a boundary to a variable as the litigation finance ecosystem develops the corresponding licensing product. It's like the carbon credit pattern all over again.
The political will to mitigate any of it just collapses because the optimization function has moved, and the First Amendment line is the doctrine that's still functioning as a boundary, for now.
Exactly. State legislatures keep trying to regulate engagement design, and courts keep striking those laws down under strict scrutiny. So as long as that doctrine holds, the platforms have no legal pressure to change. And as long as they don't change, the labs they fund don't have to either, which means the settlement architecture remains the cheapest available resolution mode, each piece holding the next in place. That's the system as engineered.
Oh, that's a tight system.
It really is. But Marcus, I have to push on your frame from the open,
Push. Go for it.
You set up an actionable trade. Watch Kalshi NYT AI, the 0.58 threshold, before summary judgment. Cross it, and the settlement architecture has won. Clean signal, totally tradable. And I get that, it's the move. But here's the assumption underneath it. You're treating the Kalshi number as if it's reading the legal merits, as if capital is aggregating information about whether the Times' copyright claim is strong, whether fair use covers training data, whether discovery changes the case. That's the standard, markets aggregate information story.
That's the story, yeah.
I don't think it's what the number is reading, though. I think it's reading the resolution architecture's preferences. Settlement is more liquid than verdict. Capital prices what's liquid. That doesn't tell you the law is settling. It tells you the question is being routed out of the legal system entirely.
That's a different signal at the same number.
Same number, totally different signal. There's a way to test that too. The Musk versus OpenAI trial. Remember that one?
Oh yeah, currently in trial, right?
Exactly. Started this past week, April 28th. Same defendant, same broad field. Major AI lawsuit on a high-profile docket. And on the Kalshi contract for whether Musk wins his case, the price has been bouncing like between roughly 35 and 50% through the run-up.
That's a coin flip.
That's the opposite of a settlement signal. Capital is pricing one OpenAI case as definitively settling, the Times at 0.68, and another OpenAI case as going to a jury verdict on the merits. Same defendant, same field, completely different price regime. Either Capital is reading two completely different legal questions and pricing each one's merits separately, or it's reading one thing across both cases.
Which is?
Which case OpenAI's lawyers can keep out of court. The Musk case is about a charitable trust breach. No licensing deal resolves that, so it goes to trial. The Kalshi price tracks the merits there because merits are what the system can offer. The Times case? Priced at 0.68 because the system has a different product, licensing. Capital sees which lever the system can pull and prices accordingly. The 0.58 threshold doesn't tell you anything about copyright law. It tells you when the licensing lever finishes deploying.
Then my frame was wrong.
Wrong is too strong. It was, incomplete. The signal is real. The trade is valid. The interpretation just has to move. It's not the legal system is finishing this question. It's the legal system is no longer being asked. Watching the threshold tells you when the routing completes.
That I'll take, but that's a different episode than the one I thought I was opening.
Okay, so the actionable frame survives, and it's sharper than where we started. Watch Kalshi, NYT, AI. The threshold is 0.58, before summary judgment. That's still the number to watch.
And read it correctly, Marcus. Read it correctly. A breach below 0.58 is not the Times losing. It's not fair use being adjudicated either way. It's the licensing architecture finishing the routing of this question out of the legal system. The doctrine doesn't lose. The doctrine becomes vestigial. The trade is real. The interpretation is sharper, much sharper.
Definitely sharper. What do you want to leave the listener holding here, Marilyn?
Okay, so last week, Google announced up to $40 billion into Anthropic. Days earlier, Amazon announced another $5 billion immediately, plus up to $20 billion more behind it. That's up to $65 billion of fresh capital just poured into one of the labs that already settled, almost simultaneously.
Settled means cleared.
Settled means moated. The companies that paid to make their copyright problems disappear are now funded at a level that makes copyright problems impossible for anyone else. Settlement architecture isn't the resolution of a legal question, it's the construction of an oligopoly priced in legal currency. The carbon credit analogy, it just completes the picture. Once the boundary becomes a market, the market becomes the floor becomes the moat becomes the industry. And the question that was supposed to be answered by the public, what does fair use mean for a generative model, gets answered by the people who can just afford to make it private.
The threshold is still on Kalshi. The signal is still tradable.
The trade has a new frame. Watch the number, read it cleanly, and notice what you're watching it become.
Before we wrap up today, I really want to take a moment to thank all of you, our dedicated listeners and viewers. If you found this discussion thought-provoking, please consider hitting that like button, leaving a comment with your insights, subscribing to our channel, or, best of all, sharing this episode to help us grow our network and reach more people with these critical insights. Marilyn, that reframing, it's not just a subtle shift. It really changes the entire landscape of what we thought was being decided here.
Exactly, Marcus. What the Kalshi number ultimately signals isn't a legal outcome, but rather the completion of a structural change. It's the moment when a public question about fair use transforms into a private market mechanism, solidifying the moat for the major players, and frankly, setting a precedent for how future constitutional-level questions around AI will be handled.
So the 0.58 isn't just a trading signal. It's the timestamp for a new era of legal bypass.
Precisely. And that, I believe, is the sharper, harder truth we need to confront. The system isn't breaking, it's rerouting.